Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
So it's film premiere week for the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. This is a big time for you. What's the haps, man?
You know what, Sam? I'll be honest with you. It's nobody ever envisioned this happening, but it has. People like keep goes, well, how did it happen? You know, a documentary. I mean, the truth is, I've been telling this story for 17 years.
Right.
I mean, I wrote a book about it. Like I think it was in '94. Everybody's Got a Price, but the director, Pete Fierro, like 6 or 7 years ago, Pete approached me. I was in New York, and as a favor to a friend, he contacted me. He said, "I'm doing this as a favor for a friend, a shoot interview." Meaning, obviously, we're going to talk real life and not wrestling storylines. And so anytime you start talking real life with me, you're going to start hearing about what God has done in my life. Mm-hmm. I'm a minister, have been for 17 years, have a ministry at a nonprofit organization. So in Pete's own words, he said, at the time, I am the somewhat backslidden son of a minister. His dad's a minister. And he said Ted's story resonated with him, and so that started a turnaround in his own life. And then anytime I would come to the New York area, you know, he would come out to see me, hear me speak. So he's heard the story told 2 or 3 different times. And Pete's normal job is he does wedding photography and video, so he documents weddings.
Sure.
But he had never, tackled a project like a feature documentary, and I don't know that he was thinking about it when he started this. So, but he approached me and he said, "Ted," he says, "I would really love to tell your story on film." And I said, "Wow," I said, "I've never really thought about that." But back then I was thinking, okay, maybe we could do this, and we'll get it, whatever it is, and we can sell it on the tables, and we can,
yeah,
a Fathom event. I never thought about that.
I mean, especially because in the wrestling business, like, there's always a guy who's got an idea for a project. Like, if you could count the number of wrestling documentaries, right? That people have been like, "Oh no, I'm working on this thing, and it's going to be," and none of it ever comes out. None of it comes to fruition.
I know, and it's like, so I wasn't looking for a whole lot. It was just like, okay, I've got a DVD with my story on it. I've got a book with my story on it.
Right.
Why not a video too? And so we plan, and so Pete's heard me talk about going to, or living in Wilcox, Arizona, this little bitty town that I grew up in after my dad died. After I finished high school there. I was there when I was very young too. So he said, "I want to see Wilcox. I want to see that cemetery that you were talking about that you would go to at night, and to visit your dad's grave and pray." And so we go out to Arizona, and Ted Jr. had never been out there. And actually, other than my wife, none of the other boys have actually ever seen Wilcox. So Ted Jr. goes along with it. And if you talk to Ted, he would tell you, I wasn't so sure about Pete. he says, I was thinking maybe, is the guy's trying to, pull one on my dad, right?
Well, that's right. Isn't that the classic wrestling story? Some wedding photographer comes up to you and he goes, "Hey, I want to make a movie about you." Oh, okay. Like, right.
And so, so Ted and Pete, get to have breakfast together, and Teddy figures out that Pete's very sincere, and here's his story, and so then Ted goes, "You know what, Dad?" He says, "How about we put this twist on the story? We tell the story from my perspective. It's your story, but I'm telling it because my son knows that I speak to a lot of men, and I talk about the importance of being a good dad. Anyway, so this project goes for 3 years, and all this stuff goes down, and here we are 3 years later, and it's completed. And so again, Teddy had been in a movie, he met a lot of people, knew a lot of people, and he said, "Dad, I've sent the documentary to these guys in Nashville who do the marketing for a lot of the big faith-based movies. God's Not Dead, God's Not Dead 2, Fireproof, Blindside. And he said, they sent me a message and they said, we'll get back to you after Christmas. The next day, they got back to him. And they said, this is great.
Wow.
We want to help you guys get this out. And I went, what? Really? And so I'm blown away by that. And so now it's like, so, you know, they start looking for some investors and what have you. And that whole thing starts to move. And all of a sudden, like Fathom has agreed to put your movie out. And I said, you're serious? 650 theaters across the United States. And it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm a Christian, and I call it a God thing. I mean, it's, you know, the whole thing was done. You know, and the reason I tell my story is I want to help people. And you know, I've been answering that question all day. Why? And I said, you know, here's even if you're not a person of faith, I would think or hope that people can watch this and come away understanding that, you know, security and peace is not found in money and wealth and things, or even fame. All those things will tantalize you for a while, but at the end of the day, they're not going to give you the security. They're not going to give you any lasting peace. And my realization of that came when, at the top of my game, when I was more famous than I was ever going to be, I call home the day after WrestleMania 8, and my wife confronts me with adultery. And I said, I don't want to talk about it on the phone. I'll be on the next plane home. She said, no, you won't. You don't live here anymore.
So I don't even want to have the conversation.
At that time.
Right.
And I was like, and she hung up. I mean, and that quickly. I mean, it's like, you know, my eyes are open. I'm like, you fool. You have probably lost the most precious thing in your life for the sole purpose of filling this void when you're on the road and your stupid ego. Not only my wife, but as I kept thinking, you know, what's going to, my kids, their stability, their peace of mind, and their future. It was the ugliest day of my life. I mean, the realizing, I said, how could I be that selfish? How could I be that selfish? But I also determined that it wasn't going to happen again. The other thing that immediately came to mind was my father. What in the world would my dad say to me today? He'd have been so disappointed. And I had lived to make him proud.
So it was never, drugs and booze were not an issue for you. It was
well,
women. Or was just drugs part of it?
I did my share of drinking and the drugging, you know. But yeah, I mean, I was the whole ball of wax.
Yeah.
You know, never to addiction. You know, never to that point. Like, oh my gosh, you know, you need to go to rehab. But as a guy on the road, you know, I did my share.
Yeah.
So it was.
But it sounds like part of the addiction might have been in the adultery. Like, that's an addiction too, right?
Yeah, I guess it is too. So, but that was what the discovery of the adultery is what brought the whole thing to light.
No, it was part of it because, you know, Ric Flair also has a documentary that's coming out about him from 30 for 30, and he's talked about it many times. He talks about how the Nature Boy character became his life. When you are the $1 Million Man and it's a hugely larger than life character and everything is getting invested in this thing, do you feel at that time a pressure to live your life as the $1 Million Man?
No, I never felt that pressure. I mean, it was like, you know, because of what was done for me in an effort to market the character. Oh my gosh, you know, like, so I'm flown everywhere first class, which wasn't done for everybody. Limousine service on a daily basis and all those things. It did go to my head.
Right.
It went to my head, and what I was on was just like, man, look at me now. I mean, you know, like a year ago, I was driving my car to all the shots. Now, you know, action figures, video games. You know, I'm a rock star.
Right. And it takes you a second before you realize, like, the reason that you have the first class and the limos and stuff is this character that was invented. It's not like they were like, let's just give this man the rock star treatment. Exactly.
And so, you know, my wife said when I would come home off the road, she said, you know, like when she could see me walking, you know, to through the airport, and she said it's like, you know, and I guess I was guarded about who I was. And she said she said about 15 minutes, like we'd be on the way home, she goes, I would watch your shoulders drop and you would relax and you were Ted again. Yeah. I was like, you know,
you weren't even conscious of it.
I wasn't even conscious of it.
Wow.
And so, you know, but the thought, you know, today I look back at that. I mean, I can tell you this, after we went through the crisis and after my wife, God bless her, after she said, I'm gonna try to stay. I believe that you sincerely are sorry, and I want to believe it. And she said, but I'm not going to make you a promise I can't keep. She goes, I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this. You know, she said, but I serve a God of restoration, not divorce, and I want to give my children the best opportunity as well. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, she's basically saying, I'm not doing this for you, pal, because you don't deserve it.
Right.
You know, but because she was willing to, I took that and I ran with it. And because one of the things she said, in spite of what you've done to me, you've always been a wonderful father. And so these boys don't know about it. They don't know anything about this until they're old enough to understand it. And I said, okay. And so that journey to restoration began immediately. And I can tell you that I could remember sitting, I can't remember what city we were in, but I'm in the Marriott Hotel, and I'm sitting in the dining room, kind of like we are right now. We're in a dining room. But I could look across the lobby into the bar, and I could see the boys. And I remember sitting there and looking across that room and going, what was I thinking? You know, I was like, what in the world was I thinking?
Yeah.
You know, one of the interviews that's in the film that I've seen since, because a lot of my contemporaries are interviewed. Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels said it well. He says, he was talking to my son Ted. He said, Ted, he says, your dad and I, we don't even identify with that. You know, like it's almost like, who was that person?
Right.
We don't identify with it anymore because of the change in our life. So, you know, today, I can honestly tell you that my wife and I are closer than we've ever been. I mean, Melanie's absolutely my best friend. You know, I love the new technology, because tonight I'm going to get on my iPhone and I'm not just going to call my wife. I'm going to be able to look at her face and FaceTime, and this is what we do. We start each day, whether we're together or I'm on the road somewhere. We pray together in the morning. We pray together in the evening most of the time, and that's the difference today. And so, again, back to what do I want for people to come away from this with? It's a few things. Number one, for young men and women who are maybe struggling, you know, to know that, you know, no matter where you are, if you're willing, like my dad said, if you're willing to work hard, if you're willing to put in the time and the effort, you can be whatever you want. Mm-hmm. You know, but because at the end of the day, you know, you're only going to value what you earn in life. I found that to be true. But even coming out of Wilcox, Arizona, 3 traffic lights. Uh-huh. You know, this little bitty high school. I get a scholarship to play college football, and then, you know, so that, you know, yeah, Dad was right, and so I go into wrestling, and I apply the same thing, and Dad was right, you know. And then this, even though I rose to the height, and even as successful as I was, I still made some terrible mistakes along the way, and I fell. And I would say this: even if you fall, get back up.
Yeah.
Because you can. Get back up and keep going. And you know what? If you stumble again, get back up. Keep getting back up. And, you know, today, people will say, well, are you really $1 million man? Are you really a millionaire, multimillionaire? I said, no, I'm not. I said, but I'll tell you what I do have. I have the love and respect of my wife and my children. and the unbelievable pleasure and joy of watching my grandchildren grow up.
Hang on. There's a couple things that I want to pick up on based on that. Firstly, so you call your wife, or you talk to your wife after WrestleMania 8, and that's when you have the adultery conversation. I would imagine that you would consider the peak of the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, to be right around the time when you're headlining with Hulk Hogan, right? So in my head, I wonder if you go, okay, I got to work on myself, I got to change myself, I got to fix myself. 1 year after that conversation, you're headlining WrestleMania with Hulk Hogan. When you realize what's going on here, how quick is the transition to getting healthy? And is there this thing like, oh no, I don't know if I want to go back into that lion's den. I know what this is. I know what this ego leads to.
So you're right. I mean, so yeah, like the next year, WrestleMania 9, we're in Las Vegas headlining WrestleMania. Number one, my wife was with me.
But I guess that's big.
At WrestleMania. But here's where it's like, that was like that was in March or April. But this is at the time when I started going, you know what? I'm still in dangerous territory here. And so by SummerSlam, 93.
Right.
I had gone to Vince and I gave him my notice. I said, Vince, I've got to go for a while.
So that had less to do with physical issues and more to do with personality issues.
Yeah. I left because kind of like if you're going to quit drinking, get out of the bar.
Yeah.
And so I needed to separate myself from that environment until I could grow stronger in the walk that I was now walking. I went back to work for Japan. Even before, Japan was like going on a retreat. I just went and did my job, went back to the hotel, and
that's it.
That was it.
Yeah.
But 2 tours into Japan, I herniated 2 discs, or actually they manifested themselves. It was like degenerative. They were there waiting to happen. And now I'm being told by a doctor that I should really retire. He put it this way. He says, you could probably go on. He says, the chances and the odds are in your favor that it won't happen. He says, but once you've done this surgery, if you get dropped on your head just right, you could be left paralyzed. And I was about to turn 40. All this had gone on in my family life. And I had intentionally said, my family's going to come before my job. And to make all that happen, I said, I'm almost 40. I mean, I also had promised myself that I would, unlike my dad, get out of the business before it killed me.
Yeah.
And so I stopped physically wrestling then. And, later I went back when Vince asked me to come and do the commentary, I think it was for the Royal Rumble in January or February. And he liked that. And I had that conversation with him. I said, look, if you'd like me to come back in a managing role or a commentator, I'd be more than willing to do that. Well, and at that time, managers, they were at TV. They weren't on the road. They weren't required to be on the road. And so I could go do that, and I could be I could be at TV 3 days every 3 weeks, and I would be in the studio 1 day a week. But most of the time, I'm at home. And that was perfect. And so that's what happened. And let's fast forward to when I left and went to WCW. Now, since this time, Vince and I have had that conversation, but, he decided to put me back on the road with a couple of guys. Sid Vicious, and then a guy named Steve Austin.
Right.
And it was kind of like to help them along and the rub, because I was
just so the people who go to these house shows, even it's not tough, but they still see.
Right.
I know to boo that guy, so I'm going to boo the guy he's with.
Right. It's kind of like the rub to help elevate him, and of course nobody foresaw Steve rising to the heights that he did, but again for me, being on the road was the danger zone.
Right.
And so I said, look, Vince is a businessman. He's not concerned with my personal life. he's going to put me where he thinks I can best serve his company. And so I put in my letter, and I went to WCW, because when I went to WCW, I was doing what I could do. I was doing the commentary, and I was showing up once a week for Nitro.
Even as a manager when you were the $1 million corporation head guy, you were still one of the top guys on the show. When you go to WCW, that's when you join the NWO, but the NWO is just so much star power. That wasn't your organization. You were just a part. At that point in your life, are you happy to be just a part, or do you miss the fact that it's not the Ted DiBiase show when you're...
But by that time, I'll be honest with you, I don't care, because the other thing is I had started going out and I had started speaking.
I see.
And that became like a snowball rolling downhill. The more I went, the more invitations I was getting. And so before wrestling, it consumed me, and it was like, that was all of me. But now it wasn't. Now this seeing other people's lives changed, and knowing that, I had in some way been an instrument to help a person get their life changed. I said, I've wrestled in front of 80,000 people. That's a pretty big thrill. But nothing came close to, and most of the speaking engagements I did then were with teenagers. So I was seeing a lot of teenagers get their lives changed by benefiting from my story.
So a lot of guys have trouble letting go, moving on to the next thing, especially at the heights that you were at. Do you think that making this transition and the fact that you actually saved your life by stepping off the pedestal has made it easier for you to transition out of that top heel Hulk Hogan era spotlight and not sit there at home now kind of woefully missing the fact that there's another top guy?
Yeah, I really, I didn't have any trouble, because people ask me that all the time.
Yeah.
Don't you miss it? Man, you were the guy, and it's like, I had a 19-year active career, and overall I was in the industry as a full-time participant for 25 years. That's long enough. And when I transitioned out of this into the ministry began to consume me in the same way. And so, and I kind of feel for the guys, because there's a lot of guys that have a real hard time making that transition.
Absolutely.
But I didn't. People ask me all the time, don't you miss it? Don't you ever just wish you could get back in there again? And I go, I really don't. And I said, now maybe if I see a really good match, or I see a young guy and I see a lot of talent and go, man, it would be nice if I could get in there and have a match with him and help him a little bit, something like that. But but wanting to be the guy again, no problem.
Now, is there a specific guy that you've seen that you're like, I'd love to be at least a part of that guy's career?
There was one for sure. My son.
Well, so when you become the $1 Million Man, before you're the $1 Million Man, you're Ted DiBiase, and you're just a really good wrestler. You're a great wrestler. You get to WWF, and at the time, the style that the WWF was doing was very different than the style that other people were doing. The kind of over-the-top, cartoony characters were not what people like you, for instance, were used to portraying. Not what wrestlers were used to portraying.
Right.
When you get there and you see these, kind of ridiculous, over-the-top but unforgettable vignettes that you're doing, and you're wearing a cape, and you're getting the $1 million belt, and you have to, dye and feather your hair, and you've got this tearaway tuxedo. Are you worried at all when that starts? Are people going to forget that I'm a wrestler, not a cartoon character?
I don't know. I don't know if I ever thought of it that way. But I was raised in the old school. I was part of it. And obviously, like when the first WrestleMania came along, and I saw some of this stuff, I fell in line with all the old school guys. Vince is killing the business, And in reality, I began to watch and realize, and I'll be honest with you, like when I picked up the newspaper and saw WWF sets indoor world attendance record, WrestleMania 3. I went, wow. if I'm going to stay in this business, that's where I have to be.
It becomes real difficult to fight success, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And then the more I thought about it, I mean, Vince comes out and just goes public and says, hey, we're sports entertainment. So what? We're good.
Right.
And it was like the more I thought about it, I said, you know what? We like wrestlers talk about the marks, and I said, you know what? We've been the biggest marks of all.
Right.
And so I thought in reality it was a stroke of genius what he did, and and I did have I had been in line for the NWA World Title, and I had done real well in Japan, so I had a great reputation within the inner circles of our business. And there were a lot of people that asked that question: why would you, such a great technical wrestler, go there? And I told them, I said, if I want to stay in wrestling and survive, this is where it's going. Because if you think it's not, then you're blind.
Right.
And
also because everybody's got a price, right? Have you heard, by the way, Bruce Pritchard's story about Vince McMahon explaining that character? Everybody's got a price thing when he's on the airplane. Have you? So no. He says that Vince McMahon is explaining the $1 Million Man character to Bruce Pritchard on an airplane, and Bruce is like, "Yeah, but I don't really understand. What is? Everybody's got a price. I don't get it." And Vince goes, "Well, watch this." And this is apparently a true story. He turns around to the guy behind him who's smoking, because you're allowed to smoke on planes at that point.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Sir, the smoking's really bothering me. Would you mind putting out your cigarette?" And the guy goes, "No, I'd really rather not. Not a hostile thing, but just I don't want to do that."
Yeah.
And then Vince goes, "Well, if I give you $50, will you put the cigarette out?" And this guy goes, "No, I'm kind of enjoying my cigarette." And they go on and on until he gets to whatever it was, $500 or whatever. "If I give you $500 right now, will you put out your cigarette?" And the guy goes, "Fine, yeah, I'll put the cigarette out." Vince gives him the cash, and then Vince looks at Bruce, and he goes, "Everybody's got a price."
I know.
Yeah.
I never heard that story. I can't believe that I'm just hearing that for the very first time.
Yeah, I love that story. So a lot of people are like, well, maybe the $1 Million Man was a lot of Vince McMahon in there.
Oh well, I mean, when I went to the meeting, the first meeting, Vince was called away to a phone call, and so I'm sitting there with Pat Patterson, and Pat looked at me and he says, "Ted," because Vince says, "I've got this tremendous idea. It's never been done before," and he said, "You're perfect. You interview so well. You're a great wrestler. You can do this, but you're going to have to trust me, because I can't tell you what it is unless you agree and sign a contract, because
if not giving away the character."
Yeah, you're giving away the character. And so, so Pat looks at me and says, "Ted, here's all you need to know. If Vince were going to be a character in his own show, this is who he would be." And then Bruce Pritchard, who I've known a long time, Bruce and I were good friends. Matter of fact, when Bruce left in Houston, I was getting ready to go to Japan, and Bruce says, "Well, I'm going up to New York to interview for a job." And I said, "Hey, I was up there in '79. They know who I am." I said, and I talked to Patterson when they initially went to Atlanta, and that thing didn't work. Because I remember Pat came in and had a meeting with everybody, and he said, "I don't want anybody to worry." He said, "Nobody's losing your job. Everybody's got a job. This is a new thing that's going to happen." I got Pat off to the side then, and I said, "Look, Pat, there's a difference between having a job and having a position." And I said, "All the positions are filled, so for now I'm going to go back to Mid-South."
Smart.
And so anyway, I told Bruce, I said, "Hey, while you're up there, throw my name out and see if anybody bites." Well, I get a message. I come in the hotel, and there's this urgent message: "Call Bruce Pritchard." And he said, "Well, Ted, two things have happened while you're in Japan. Number one, Bill Watts sold the territory to Jimmy Crockett. So when you go back there, you'll now be working for Crockett." And he says, "Number two, do not sign a contract with Jimmy Crockett until you have an opportunity to talk to Vince McMahon. He wants you, and he wants you bad." And so, there you go.
That's got to be a great. That's a great phone call to get. So when you find out that this character is Vince McMahon's baby, and it's kind of, you're going right to pretty quick in short order working with Hogan, do you feel, is that a lot of pressure, or at that point in your career you're like, "This is what I've been waiting for. I'm ready for this"? Give it all to me.
I wasn't cocky or arrogant about it, but I thought, and I guess I was a little bit, okay, how am I going to, I know what I can do in the ring.
Yeah.
But it was like, helping me become that character. And it didn't take very long. You know, it's like with just a little bit of direction, and I just fell right into it, and I got very comfortable. But I mean, the genius of Vince sometimes. I mean, the laugh.
Right.
Okay, I'm cutting an interview, and that laugh is just a real exaggeration of the way I really laugh. So I do an interview, and I do the boisterous laugh for whatever reason in the interview. Vince happens to be walking by, sticks his head in the door, and he goes, "That's the $1 Million Man." And he says, "I want to hear that laugh every time you cut an interview." So
from that moment on.
Oh yeah. So now I tell people, I go, I have a 19-year wrestling career. I'm in the Hall of Fame, and what am I best remembered for?
Well, that's one of those great things. Like, I would love to know that Vince loved that thing, because it's like, if you're cutting this promo that you're not terribly confident in, you know in the back of your mind, as long as I wrap it up with that laugh, I'm good.
Yeah.
No problem.
Oh,
so how did you feel when, talk about like repenting and all that. Do you feel like you have any repenting to do for unleashing Virgil onto the world?
Well, actually, I can't claim Virgil because I didn't even know Virgil until they introduced me to him in the office. So I'm not sure who found Virgil, but they hired Virgil. You know, I mean, he had the look, and you know, he had the guns. You know, and I guess that's about all I can say about that.
No, I've had to do a couple of things with Virgil, and I cannot imagine going up and down the roads with Virgil.
Yeah, I mean.
Have you asked him? Hey,
you know, here's the thing about, you know, like the guy, you know, he wasn't a bad guy. I mean,
No.
he was on time. He showed up. He doesn't drink. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't do drugs. I've been told that he likes to gamble, and but other than that, you know, but I did realize that, you know, not the smartest book on the shelf.
No, it certainly isn't.
Not at all. You know,
No.
if he'd have had, and what we could have done if Virgil had some really good or just decent wrestling skills, you know, we could have had a heck of a run there.
But that wasn't in the cards.
That wasn't in the cards.
Was
no.
there ever, like, you plan out something? Because there are a lot of great moments that actually involve Virgil. A lot of the stuff that you're doing, bringing the kids out of the crowd and screwing up their days and stuff, that involves Virgil. Were there any sort of golden moments that Virgil flubbed on? You'd have to be like, Virg, like, we all had this idea, but...
No, I can't really think of anything like that. I mean, he always did what he was told. And, of course, because we knew his limitations, he was never asked to do that much.
Smart.
Now, I did have to have a WrestleMania match at WrestleMania 7 with Virgil. But I also had Roddy Piper at ringside coaching him from the outside to help us get through that.
Yeah.
And true story, match is over, I walked back through the curtain, and one of the boys, I can't remember who it was, they looked at me and they said, "You know, DiBiase, you really can work with a broom. You just proved it."
Yeah, I mean, what is that like when you go like, okay, you know, we did the thing with Hogan and Piper and Flair and blah, 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 and it's like, okay, now the next big good guy that the $1 Million Man is going to put over is Virgil. That's the next. Are you going like, you gotta be kidding me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But I knew what we did with Virgil would be short-lived anyway. And again, I have no animosity towards Virg. I mean, you know, he just, you know, and you know, it would be great if I could still make appearances with him, but he's done so many just dumb things that make it's like if I allow myself to be seen with him, it makes me look like an idiot.
Well, you don't have to make appearances with him because he always brings that flag with him that says you're making appearances with him, so it doesn't matter.
Or sets up shop in Grand Central Station.
He does do that. I have a buddy who you did do an appearance with Virgil once, and you know, my buddy was he was more there to see you than Virgil, which I guess sometimes people, but Virgil doesn't like to see a dollar go to waste, a dollar that could be his. So he has one of those replica $1 Million belts. It's got the felt on the back, and he's asking you to sign it. He wants Ted DiBiase's signature on the $1 Million belt, and he to this day is furious about this because You sign the thing, and then he looks up to talk to you, and the minute his eyes are off the belt, Virgil grabs it and he signs it. And so now he's got this belt with Virgil's signature on it, and he's got to pay for the signature.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because Virgil will strong arm you if he has to.
Oh, I know. And that's it's just sad. I mean, I don't know.
So what about when, okay, your son's going to start wrestling. Okay, cool, you know, I can teach him. When you find out, and we're sticking Virgil with him, are you going, guys, this I don't know what kind of karma I'm making up for.
This is great. Number one, I said, you know, my son goes to college, gets a degree in business administration, then tells me he wants to be a wrestler. I almost had a cow. But you know, and I said, why am I now just hearing you want to wrestle? Well, all my life I was told I wouldn't be a wrestler. You know, not because I didn't love the wrestling business, but just, you know, with all that comes along with it. You know, I mean, you know, son, you know my story. You know what I've been through. But I also realized that if I didn't let him go find out for himself, that it might drive a wedge in my relationship with him. And some things you just have to find out on your own. And he did some. This is funny. You know, when I found that they were going to, and he told me that they're going to put Virgil with me. It's very brief, very, very short, but they just think, you know, I think the idea was they were trying to do a thing whereby he keeps saying I'm not my dad, but he keeps acting like me, right?
And they put the $1 million title and they give him Virgil. Yeah. And
so the first night Virgil's on TV with him, you know, I'm watching the live show, and it's over. Well, I live in the Central Time Zone, so it's over at 10 o'clock my time. At 10:05, my phone rings, and it's Daddy said, "Dad, how did you put up with this idiot for as long as you did? He's driving me crazy." I just started laughing.
I did a radio thing with him once that because I've done a bunch of stuff with him on the air and stuff, but I flew him in for a live show thing that I was doing, and I thought it might get complicated, but when I tell you I was woken up that morning with Virgil phone calls, and it did not stop all day. First of all, you got to send him a money order. You got to send it to the right guy. He only takes flights this way. I mean, just never ending. So when your son decides to leave WWE, and I mean, even up until his last day there, people are talking about him like, whoa, that's one to watch. That's one to watch. Like that was how he was described all the time. When he decides to leave, and I think it surprised a lot of people. Were you like, you know, I would have liked to have seen you get a title, get something, or are you going, that's great because you did what I wanted to do, which was escape the business before it grabs you?
I was proud of him. I mean, he called me, and you know, just before, and he said, "Dad, I just wanted you to be aware of something." And he said, "But before I tell you, the first thing you got to promise me is you won't say those words." And I said, "What words might that be?" "I told you so."
I saw that one coming.
and so he told me, he said, "My contract's about up, and they want me to resign." And he said, "I'm not going to go back." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Because basically you're right." He said, "You know, it is better than when you were there in terms of, you know, like 4-day work week, 3 days off, more accountability with the drug testing policy and all that stuff." And he said, "But it's still, if you're a star," and I told him that. I said, "In my opinion, the only way to be in that business is to be a star. Otherwise, you're going to make a good living. But then when you're, 30? Mm-hmm. Now, at 30, you're old."
Yeah.
And then what? You know, you got to save your money. And I said, but in doing that, being a star, and he saw, you know, like John Cena. John Cena's a great guy. And John Cena's made a lot of money. But, you know, John Cena's also been married and divorced one time. Yeah. You know, it cost him a marriage. And I said, you know, it's going to, you know, if you're the flag bearer for the company, you're going to be working a lot more than 4 days a week. And I said, because nobody works harder in that company than Vince himself. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to be expected of you. And he got that. He understood that. But that's what he also understood. He says, if I do that, it's not fair to my wife and it's not fair to my child. And I said, I won't say those words. And I said, but I'm glad you figured it out, and I totally support you, And so he bowed out gracefully, and if he wanted to go back, he probably could, but he's doing really well now. He had a little bit of I think an identity crisis for a little while. Following that, like, okay, this didn't work. What am I going to do now? But he's doing really well.
Yeah, I saw you at a show recently, because you still make appearances, you still do signings and do all kinds of stuff, and you put a guy. It was Pat Buck's show for WrestlePro. It was in Jersey, and you put a guy in the $1 Million Dream. But then I was like, just the fact that seeing you do the $1 Million Dream, that's one thing, but then you locked the leg and you did the Russian leg sweep and you took the full bump. And I think I talked to the guys in the back, they were all blown away by it. Like, everybody was sitting there going, wait a minute, he's still got one in him. Like, he took the full, because everybody was under this impression that, well, I guess,
yeah,
you lost, you couldn't do it anymore. But the fact that you took the full bump, then you got out of the ring, and I saw you jumped off the apron, no problem.
Yeah.
And we're going,
well,
where's that tuxedo?
I didn't really jump off the apron.
Well, you did better than most people.
Yeah, but I mean, because like with 2 artificial knees, I can't be, if I jump off the apron, I might be going to the hospital to get them fixed.
But have you, when you do that, when you take a bump like that, is there no part of you that goes like, I could do a little more of that? I still got a little bit in me. There's still a little gas in the tank.
Well, yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit,
yeah,
right?
Maybe. It's kind of like
fun.
Everybody goes, yeah, have you ever considered, like one more match? I said, well, not really, but everybody's got a price.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think everybody needs to make sure that they go see this movie. I was going to say event. It is an event. It's Fathom Events. It's going to be, it's one of those things, Fathom Events does concerts and all kinds of things like that. It's those 1 night, 2 night only theater events. But this means that it's not just a limited New York, LA release. This is a big theater thing. And I mean, whether it's to support the message, whether it's to support you yourself, Ted DiBiase, whether it's just to support the wrestling business, because a lot of people listening just want to support pro wrestling.
Right.
Make sure you go out and you see this thing in a theater. You'll be able to get it on digital afterwards, I'm sure. But make sure you get to a theater, you buy your popcorn, you sit down in a theater and watch this thing on the big screen. I think it's going to be amazing. And I appreciate the time, man.
I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate you helping us get the word out there. And for fans that are listening, you can go to thepriceoffame.com, or you can go to fathomevents.com, I believe, and I think you enter your zip code, and it'll pull up the theaters that are in your area. But it's Tuesday, November the 7th, at 7 p.m. in whatever time zone you're in. So I hope you turn out. And here's what you can do. Mm-hmm. You can do what I'm doing, and you can Devo the Ric Flair 30-30, because it's on later that night.
Oh, is it?
Or you could just go to the movie and run home and see Rick.
Yeah. Well, it's on TV. Record it. You're fine.
Exactly.
You'll see it when you get home.
There you go.
Cool, man. Well, thanks a lot.
You bet. Thanks, Sam.